The housing crisis in America has reached a dangerous and critical tipping point because more families now are not just downsizing, but they are being forced to move into RVs. And the crazy thing is, RVs used to be a symbol of freedom and retirement. You know, people that owned RVs in the past were people that had a bunch of leisure time and disposable income to travel the country as they please. But now an RV is kind of like the symbol of last resort for people who have nowhere else to go. It's like one step away from being homeless. And the most worrying part about this is that the number of people who are choosing to live in RVs now as the last affordable housing option are exploding. Recent survey data shows that about 500,000 Americans now live in RVs full time, which is more than double what it was just a few years ago. A third of them are actually raising children in these RVs, and most of them make less than $75,000 a year. So it's not really a lifestyle choice. It is the only choice in order to have a comfortable home that they can afford. These are people who are on fixed incomes. These are disabled veterans. These are single parents trying to get by. Here's one woman, for example, who's doing this, who used to be running a successful daycare business in Oregon, and she was paying $2,000 a month in rent. But after a medical emergency and an eviction, she and her kids now live in a 175 square foot RV. They park at campgrounds when they can afford it, and when they can't, they live off grid, bathing themselves in rivers and conserving water and moving every 2 to 3 weeks. Or here's another example of an older woman who sold her house in Kentucky in order to be closer to her family. But by the time she looked for a new place, prices had soared. And instead of taking on a crushing mortgage in retirement, she bought a $29,000 RV and now pays $550 a month at an RV park. And today I'm walking down Bonita Drive, and pretty soon I'll head down to downtown Sausalito over here on Caledonia Street and walk along over there. There's another older guy that they talked to who is retired, and he could not find an apartment for rent under $1,200 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he lives. So he bought an older RV with his savings, and his shower doesn't work and his fridge barely works. And the thing is, living in an RV sounds cheaper at first, but there are a lot of hidden costs to owning these RVs that a lot of people in this situation don't really consider and find out the hard way once it's too late. Very similarly to people who buy homes and find out the hard way that, wait a minute, there's a lot of additional expenses here that I wasn't accounting for. Like, for example, RVs need repairs. You know, they're not built for full-time living. So you have air conditioning, plumbing, and appliances that fail more often because they're being used to death on a full-time basis as a full-time home. So unless it's something that's completely retrofitted to be more robust for full-time living, there's a good chance that these things can fail at a much higher rate than they would in a traditional home. Then, of course, there is debt. If you decide to finance your RV, which it looks like at least nobody in this story did who bought one out of desperation, but if you do, you know, they depreciate fast just like any other vehicle, and you can be easily upside down on your payments where that RV is now worth less than what you owe on it, just like being upside down on a mortgage. You also have a lot of instability because a lot of campgrounds, for example, they usually limit stays to about 14 days. And after that, you're forced to move. So even if you can afford to stay in a campground, which will give you at least water and electrical hookups and a place to take a shower, if your RV doesn't have one, you're limited to 2 weeks before you got to hunt for another one. But a lot of people, honestly, they can't even afford to stay in campgrounds full time anyways, because that has gotten expensive too. And of course, there's no stability for the children, people who are raising kids in these RVs, if they have to be moving around all the time. I mean, it's almost impossible to have them go to a school because you pretty much are limited to staying in the area. And if you're just floating around in the RV, that's going to make it very hard to stay in the area consistently while always having a fresh place to go. But it's not all bad. There are some benefits to doing this, and at least it does pay off in some way. Like, for example, the kids, they spend a lot more time outdoors and off the phones and off the tablets since they're always outdoors, basically surrounded by nature, you know, in a campground or parking on public lands, whatever it is. And then people also foster a sense of community in these RV parks because a lot of people are in similar situation. And as we know, misery loves company, and people can relate to each other. And really the best benefit to it is that people get financial relief. That's why they're doing this to begin with. You know, having the RV lifestyle puts people in a situation where they can finally take a breath of fresh air and be able to pay the bills, be able to pay down debt, and possibly even start building up their savings again so they can get into a more stable and desirable living situation. But this is a worrying trend because ever since 2019, the number of Americans living in RVs, vans, or boats has risen 41%. You see that a lot here in Sausalito too. I walk down all of these marinas with you guys, and a lot of them are just regular sailboats that are out there parked. So many people live on those sailboats, guys. They're very small. You know, you got to be able to live on the water where it's constantly moving. So if you get motion sickness like me, it's not going to be for you.